Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with ground beef stroganoff noodles. That's right, sometimes hamburger needs some help. In fact, there's a packaged product they developed to help hamburger, which they called, I believe, Hamburger Helper. But with this recipe, we're basically going to make the same thing, only with like 40 less ingredients. And while this is a shortcut one-pan version of classic stroganoff, I think I like this one as much, if not better. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by melting some butter in some oil over medium-high heat, to which we will add a generous cup of thinly sliced mushrooms, along with about a teaspoon of kosher salt. And we'll go ahead and stir all that together, and we're going to cook this stirring occasionally until those mushrooms start to turn a beautiful golden brown, which does not happen right away. Okay, that salt's going to draw water out of the mushroom. So at first your pan's going to be kind of wet and steamy, but eventually that moisture evaporates away, and your mushrooms will start to fry in that oil and butter. And eventually, a few minutes later, they hopefully will look like this. And that's it. Once our mushrooms do take on a little bit of color, we'll go ahead and toss in some diced onions, along with a pound of the finest ground beef we can find. And then what we'll do is take the edge of a spoon or spatula, and we'll go ahead and break that beef up into nice small crumbles. And of course, how big or small you break up your meat is your business. But if you're asking me, I think you should break it up pretty small. And then what we'll do is cook our crumbled up beef and onions for about 5 minutes or so to not only brown the beef, which improves the flavor, but we also want those onions to soften and sweeten. And of course, turn translucent. And at any point during that process, we can stop and add some freshly ground black pepper, as well as, of course, a few shakes of cayenne, which is optional, not optional. So I went ahead and stirred that in and continued cooking. And about 3 or 4 minutes later, my pan looked like this. Oh, and you see how the bottom of the pan is dry, and our ingredients are actually cooking in the fat and not boiling in some kind of liquid? Right, that's exactly what we want. And if you do have a bunch of liquid, let it evaporate out until your pan looks like this. And that's it. Once our beef and onions are looking good, we'll go ahead and toss in a couple cloves of finely minced garlic, as well as a rounded tablespoon of flour, and we will stir that in and cook that for about a minute or so, just to take that raw edge off the garlic, and toast that flour a little bit. And even though that's not a lot of flour, along with the starch from our noodles, that's going to help tighten up our sauce a little bit. And after cooking that for about a minute or so, you'll notice everything sort of sticking to the bottom of the pan, which is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Because what we'll do now is stop and put in 2 tablespoons of a very surprising ingredient, and that would be some vodka. Oh yeah, you heard me, vodka. And be careful, sometimes when you put that in there, it can flame up, especially if you tip the pan like this. So don't tip the pan like that. And because that vodka is so high in alcohol, it's going to evaporate really quickly. So it's not really going to deglaze the bottom too well. But that's okay, because as soon as we put that in, we'll go ahead and toss in our beef broth, and obviously try to use something nice. And then we'll also add about a cup of cold fresh water, and we'll stir all that together, making sure we're scraping the bottom of the pan to release all that cooked on caramelized goodness. And then all we need to do at this point is wait for this to come back to the simmer. And once it does, we'll give it another stir. And then we will simply let this cook for 10 minutes, during which time that foam on the top will magically disappear, and things will reduce down a little bit. And thanks to that and that little bit of flour, you'll see things maybe thicken up a little bit. So that's what I did. And about 10 minutes later, things look like this. And then what we'll do at this point is lower our heat to medium, and we will move into final production, which means we will add the egg noodles of our choice, and we'll stir those in. And for me, the smaller twisted up ones work better, but really any kind of egg noodle will do, although depending on the size and shape, your times may vary. But that's okay, we're not really going to go by time. We're going to go by look and feel, which is almost always more accurate. And then once we have those noodles stirred in, and everything seems evenly mixed, we'll go ahead and cover this, and then still on medium heat, we will cook this for 5 minutes. And yes, I should have mentioned this earlier, but whatever pan or pot you decide to cook this in should have a nice tight-fitting lid, since we want to keep that steam and heat trapped inside. And that's it. After 5 minutes, we will uncover, and we'll give this a good stir. And the amount of liquid you're seeing at the pan at this point is just about perfect. But if yours seems to be a little too dry, go ahead and add a splash of broth or water, so there's enough moisture to finish cooking the noodles. And then what we'll do is cover it back up and cook it for another 3 minutes, at which point it may or may not be done. Right, it depends on the noodle. So what we'll do is give it a stir and evaluate. And as I stirred this around with the spoonula, it felt right and it looked right. But we have to be sure. So I grabbed a fork and gave it a taste. And yes, as I suspected, it was perfect. And if it is, we can go ahead and reduce our heat to low. And besides tasting for the doneness, we're also, of course, giving it a taste for seasoning. And I decided mine needed a little more salt and another pinch of freshly ground black pepper. So I stirred that in. And by the way, when you test yours, if the noodles are still not cooked, just simply cover it and cook it till they are. And if you have to add another splash of beef broth, go ahead. But if you are happy with how it feels and tastes, we can move on to add the last ingredient, which is about a half cup of sour cream. And as soon as that's stirred in, and we've given it one final taste, we should be ready to serve. And of course, it goes without saying, if you want to add some different spices or herbs to this, go for it. I mean, you are, after all, the Fred Belitnikoff of your ground beef stroganoff. Oh, and speaking of great receivers, a dish like this is a perfect catch-all for any kind of vegetable odds and ends you might have in the fridge. So feel free to adapt this to what you have on hand. But anyway, I gave mine one last taste and decided it was perfect. So I went ahead and served it up in a nice warm bowl. Oh yeah, extra credit for using a warm bowl. And then to finish this off, I'm going to add a dollop of sour cream to the top, followed by some finely and freshly sliced green onions. Or if you have them, chives are also very nice. And that's it, our ground beef stroganoff noodles are ready to enjoy. And this, my friends, without a doubt, is one of my all-time favorite one-pan meals. Or just the epitome of comforting home cooking. Oh, and in case you're wondering what that vodka tastes like we added, well, that is a tricky question to answer, since vodka really doesn't have a flavor, or at least not one that's easy to identify. But what it does in this, just like it does when you add it to a tomato sauce, is intensify and amplify all the other flavors involved. So if you have it, I would definitely add some. But if you don't, you could just put in a splash of white wine, or nothing, and this will still be fantastic. And for something that's so easy and requires just a handful of ingredients, this in no way tastes like any kind of shortcut recipe. Okay, I love the classic version of beef stroganoff, but as I said in the intro, I like this just as much, and maybe even better. All right, let's just call it a tie. And if you are my age, or somewhere close, and you remember eating Hamburger Helper growing up, I think that's going to make this even more enjoyable. So to summarize, you do not need Hamburger Helper to help hamburger. You can help it by doing what we did in this video. And it's been my experience that if you help your hamburger like this, it will help you. Help you be happy, full, and satisfied. Which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.